As I was saying before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to talk a little bit about Connect, our program and partnership. For those of you who are new, if you are new, welcome. We try to do these a couple times a year for you with different subjects. So I'll get started with Connect. Connect is a San Diego nonprofit. It's been around for 35 plus years. And we really just want to help entrepreneurs scale through our different programs. Our programs vary from providing access to mentors and education, as well as different sets of office hours we have with our sponsors, such as legal, IT, as well as SBIR. We also have applications open for one of our cool programs called Cool Companies. So if you're curious or interested, feel free to check out our website for more information. That is connect.org, or you can email us at team@connect.org. I will make sure we put that somewhere in the chat at some point. Now for our program and partnership. So SBIR Connect is a Connect program, but it is through a partnership with NIWC Pacific under NAVWAR. I am not trying to lose you with the acronyms. NAVWAR is the Naval Information Warfare Systems Command, and it is one of the Navy System Commands, or SYSCOMs. If you are new to the government or new to the Navy, we have a couple great resources to kind of understand the function and relevance and infrastructure of the Navy. So we have a blog, and if you're not much of a reader, we also have a Navy overview video. I'll also make sure I put those links in the chat. But it is through this partnership that we created this program, with the hope to bring more awareness to the SBIR and STTR program. That's the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Program, and also to help foster relationships between government, industry, and academia. And so actually the set of speakers today is a great set for that. So I'll go ahead and introduce them. Quick fun fact, I'm pretty sure this is the set of people that made this partnership possible. So big thank you on the government side. And I'm going to start with Shadi Azum, actually, our series regular. He is the SBIR STTR program manager at NAVWAR. We are always lucky to have him here. And we are also super thankful to have Paul Herbert and Stephen Crutchfield from the ORDA office. That is the Office of Research and Technology Applications Office, also known as the T2 office, which is Technology Transfer. So with that, I think it's time we get started. Just a couple of notes. The questions we'll save for the very end. So as the presentations go on, feel free to ask them on the Q&A, and we either will answer them then or wait for the Q&A, which is usually the 10 to 15 minutes at the very end of the workshop. So with that, I am going to mute myself and introduce Shadi Azum. And you guys let me know if you see the slides, all right?
Okay, well, thank you. Wait. Hello, everyone. Okay. I think it's starting to share. Full screen, perfect. I see it. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Gretel mentioned I am a series regular. So yes, I am the NAVWAR SBIR STTR program manager. In each one of the workshops, I think we try to focus on a specific topic. For this one, because it's a new year and because our program got reauthorized, I thought it best to just quickly summarize some of those updates. And those are shown here. It's just 2 slides, but we'll go ahead and get started just to not take away from our true core speakers here today. So we did get a reauthorization for the SBIR STTR program. It was authorized by the 11th hour. Trust me, we were all on edge. I really meditated a lot on this, but there were a couple of things that were introduced as a part of the program reauthorization. I've kind of summarized it here, but I would want to take away or if you're going to take anything from this, it's the fact that we are still, as a Navy as a whole, we are still trying to interpret the reforms that were introduced. You can see it publicly. I apologize, I have not actually included the bill that was signed off, but it does detail in full length what are some of the recommended changes, the recommended optimizations to the program. The first one was a concern about some of the small businesses that have engaged in this program and their dealings with any entity outside of the United States. So there are certain requirements that are being now formulated for a small business to assert what their engagements are with any other business or any other entity outside of the US. So that might come into the form of additional assertions or a specific signed memo from your company whenever you are submitting a proposal to any broad agency announcement. The second thing is updated performance benchmarks. I think that the key word here was SBIR mills, if I understand it, but there's been some word news about some small businesses that have recurring SBIR, SETR awards. And a lot of those companies kind of stay in this state where they only have phase 1 or phase 2 awards and don't go past that certain threshold. So they kind of stay in that arena and keep getting those kinds of awards. Not a bad thing, but there are some benchmarks that DoD and Navy are trying to establish that will help identify and ensure that those companies that do get phase 1 or phase 2 awards meet a certain benchmark. And then the last thing that we're actually, as a Navy as a whole, we're trying to investigate is something called open topics. We kind of did something like this before. If you saw our tech acceleration around the fiscal year 2019, and it was the topic that starts with N19A. Those topics are meant to be very broad and have a minimized submission. If you've participated in SBIR SETR before, it's usually about 20 pages in your technical proposal. For those kinds of open topics, the submission requirements are much simpler. It's about 5 pages and it's accelerated in terms of its award. So we are trying to investigate or release an open topic in that nature for this coming calendar year. But again, on these 3 sub-bullets that are here, they're just the takeaway is that there are some optimizations that may be introduced in the program, but we will obviously keep you guys posted on that. If you'd like more information about this, you can visit the Navy SBIR website, also at navysbir.com. And then, of course, a lot of that information is cascaded into the website that Gretel mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Okay, it's just one other thing that it's not new, but we've adopted it in the Navy in light of the reauthorization is a rolling topic submission. So typically, if you participated in SBIR in the past, there are cycles. And hopefully you have subscribed to the mailing list that's in the hyperlink shown on this slide. Well, now, instead of doing the cycles, the Navy has the ability to push a topic at any point in time within the year. So the key thing is not to necessarily abide by the 3 cycles that's defined in the Navy SBIR website. Just always keep an eye on the website. I think the website also does have an ability for you to subscribe to their mailing list so that you can get an update when a topic has been announced or a BAA has been released. For those that are following the cycles of cycle 1, 2, and 3, or A, B, and C for SBIR and SETR respectively, I've shown the dates here. For us at NAVWAR, we do not have any topics that are currently out for the 23.1/A cycle, but some of our sister Navy syscoms are participating in it. So please be sure to check those topics out as well. The other dates for the cycles are tentatively listed in the 2 sub-bullets here. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to send us an email, whether it's to myself representing NAVWAR or to Gretel representing Connect interfacing with us. Aside from that, I don't have any other updates, and I will give the floor back to Gretel.
Oh, I'm muted. Should know better after 3 years. Thank you so much. Like Shadi mentioned, a lot of topics are out. There might not be Nav War, but they are like Nav Air, I think has a decent amount. You can find them on connect.org, or if you go to, as Shadi said, NIWC.com, or the website that he listed, and I'll make sure I add it on the Q&A if I can, because that lists all of the DoD, so not just Navy. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speakers. So we have Paul Herbert and Stephen Crutchfield from the ORDA office, or the T2 office, Technology Transfer. It's all spelled out for you. I promise it's not that confusing. So I'm going to mute myself again, pause my video, but share this slide. So please let me know if you cannot see them.
While she gets up the slides, my name is Paul Herbert. I run the tech transfer office for NIWC along with Stephen Crutchfield, who you'll hear from momentarily. With the whole acronym thing, I've already been warned by Gretel. It's kind of like any of you Superman fans with Mitzelplick. I might go back to the fifth dimension if I use an acronym. So the watch is on to whether I use a unexplained acronym, and I'll see if I can get away with not doing that. As this first slide pops up, so tech transfer, it's T2, as Gretel's already mentioned, varies across the different organizations. You've probably recognized that nobody in the government does things the same way. We try to do it the same. So this brief and any answers we do in Q&A is all going to be about how we do it here. And one of the things we really like is feedback. We think we have a pretty good handle on T2. However, we don't always know whether it conveys the way we think it conveys. And so people providing feedback definitely helps us. And on this slide used to have a lot more. We'd be about 5 or 6 slides into the brief by now. But again, going by feedback, we've learned people don't really care about the history of T2 going back to President Carter, Stephen Wilder, all our instructions. So we narrowed it down to really saying, look, this is what T2 is about, and this is a definition of T2. Still probably not captivating for the audience, and so we skip down to the bottom of the slide, and that's what we're going to try to do here about our brief, is not talk so much about us. We're going to give training, but we want to explain why you would actually be interested in tech transfer. And you can see we've listed them out. You know, you might be able to create intellectual property with the government, collaborate with us, generate income using some of our intellectual property, and just the networking, gaining insight for future work with, say, our program offices, which really what you're interested in, the acquisition, but we might be able to help along the way within tech transfer. So can I have the next slide? And as I go into this next slide, we won't have a slide that shows how we interact with the ecosystem. We are part of a lot of the organizations in San Diego, like we work with Connect, San Diego Innovation Council, The Brink, San Diego Startup Week. You'll see us around. Of course, if you see us anywhere out in town, feel free to ask us questions, even if it's just like, what's our favorite beer, or where we get our best pizza, and we can all have that debate when that comes. So again, this slide, the first part of the slide talks about what a PIA is. Usually we don't start with a PIA because for the most part, the actual agreement itself is not going to be interesting to you. But the interesting part is the reason we're here today is because of Partnership Intermediary Agreement, the PIA. We have an authority that we could enter an agreement with Connect, and we use SBIR funds to fund events like this, to reach out into the community and try to help small businesses, yourselves, and academia work better with the government. So that all makes sense, and I want to thank Connect for putting this on and bringing you all so we can talk to you, get some feedback, some dialogue, hopefully at the end. And just in case we haven't captivated what you really want to get out of this, you can look at why we say, why do we use it? The flip side of it is, why would you be interested in a PIA? Sometimes there'll be tech scans that come out. The prize challenges may or may not come out of PIAs. Same thing with STEM, training like this. And depending on our funding and the labs, you may see them do more T2 support. So it's really depending on what region you're in, how they use their PIAs. We're not using ours as much as we'd like to, but as Shadi said before, we start getting into open topics and we get into more and more into the ecosystem, I think the PIA is going to be more and more valuable, and it's going to be a point of connection between us and a lot of the small business, how to, where to, and asking questions. And it's at the bottom there. The one thing the PIA can't do is it can't actually do prototyping, procuring, and R&D. It can help do it, can't do it. That's me. So yeah, the next slide. So this is usually where we start. Is the two main agreements or authorities that you'll see from a tech transfer are license agreements, either a patent or software, and that's really where we have some IP internal to the government, and we have authorities from the Congress that allows us to license it out to industry so they can turn it into a commercial venture. I will say, as of right now today, if you're curious of what that might look like and does it ever work, there's a New York Times article today. If you can Google it, NYT, EpiTracker. We've had a CRADA with them, which I've already defined, right? Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, that's not a penalty, and a licensing agreement with them. And they were also a cool company. So that's kind of us pushing information out. TechLink, which is also a partnership intermediary like Connect, but they have a different role. They have a list of all the DoD patents, and they also are funded to actually help companies work agreements like patent license agreement or CRADAs with the government. So they're funded. It's a free service to you. You can go to their website. There's one in the backups. Talk to them, see what IP is out there. And it's a service that the government pays to help everybody work better together. So we think those are pretty straightforward. Where it gets a little different, and Stephen's going to take over after this, is the Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. This is where we actually work together on a technical specified R&D within our mission. It's a great tool. It lets us share IP with the company. If you have a SBIR funding, you can do a CRADA. And that's all great. And it doesn't fall under the FAR, so our agreements are much faster. The challenge we have is with a contract, which is what most people are used to, is the government funding an effort. With a CRADA, we can't send money out. It's really about partnering, and you could pay us, but we tend to be expensive for small companies. But it's about, again, it goes back to being, it's a partnership, and for it to be a partnership and nobody to fund, we have to find that right connection at the right time. So there's going to be lots of things like, hey, I have this technology, I'd like to work with you, and it may be a great technology, it may just be the wrong time, and that's where it probably gets a little frustrating for people. So we have a great authority. Timing is a little bit hard, and I think this is where I turn over to Stephen, and he actually gives you some real examples of using the authorities to try to give you a better idea of what a CRADA is and what it can be used for. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, can you hear me? This is Stephen.
We can hear you.
You can switch me over, Gretel. I'll wait for you.
You're in. Just keep going to the next slide.
Okay, yeah, next slide, please. I might not be as well-spoken and entertaining as Paul, but I'm Stephen Crutchfield. I'd like to share with you some examples of CRADAs to give you an idea of what you can do with a cooperative research and development agreement. And I would say that this is just, we could do a lot of stuff with the CRADA. So these are just to give you some ideas. If we start up in the upper left-hand corner, we did various agreements to allow people to access MCAS Miramar, Marine Corps Air Station, Miramar as part of CRADA efforts. We had Qualcomm come out with their autonomous vehicles, and we had a microgrid project going on out there. Another company came out and set up a tower for 5G and created a 5G living lab there as a result of our CRADAs, and it allowed a lot of research and development efforts that happened there on the base, which is pretty cool. We have several agreements in additive manufacturing. That's the second photo over in the top there. And that's just an example of where a company, HP in this case, had additive manufacturing technology that we wanted to assess for its military capability. And so we brought it in, we checked it out, we did some printing, some testing. We tested some of the units that we printed on vehicles to see how well they lasted and how they performed. And it was kind of an iterative development cycle there with HP, which was great. Next one over is just an example of a limited purpose, or LP CRADA, which there really isn't any collaboration going on with a limited purpose CRADA. It's a type of CRADA that's just limited to providing something to industry or academia. It could be like government software, government equipment, a device, material, data. So if you're interested in using something that the government has, we could transfer that to you under a limited purpose CRADA that you could use for research development, test evaluation, and engineering activities. You can't use it for production purposes or commercial purposes or anything like that. But if you want to kick the tires on something we have or some data we have to develop one of your products, or just to see how it works, that's an opportunity there. So in this example, we had some software that we loaned out to 20 companies and had a lot of good feedback on the software, and it ended up transitioning, like one of the companies ended up using it in a Army program of record, which was pretty cool. And then down on the bottom, I'll try to go through these a little quickly here, but we had another CRADA with a company called Swarm, where we had created these nanosat, these radar retro reflectors. So you could hit this stuff in outer space and detect where these satellites were. So we affixed our technology onto their nanosats, threw them up into space and tested them out, which was pretty cool. And the last one on the bottom here is an example of a loan-in LP CRADA, where you might have something that we want to test out. In this case, it was some augmented reality type weapons. And we tested those out, which ended up, the group that was testing it out ended up buying several of these after they tested it out, because they liked them so much and their sponsor liked them so much. So next slide. This is just, I wanted to give you a high level view of how CRADAs and SBIR, STTR work together. Up at the top here, we have two different websites, FLC and TechLink. The FLC is the Federal Lab Consortium for Technology Transfer. And that is, all our counterparts across the federal government. There's over 400 labs, I believe, like NIWC Pacific, not just part of the DoD, but part of, NASA, Department of Health, National Institutes of Health, Department of Agriculture. They all have representation there at the FLC. And you can go to that website and see what all the different lab expertises are and what kind of technologies and capabilities they offer. TechLink is specific to the DoD. On TechLink's website, you'll find a lot of intellectual property that the DoD has. They have a list of all the patents. And TechLink also has insight into capability areas of the DoD labs. So if you're looking for someone to work with in the federal lab system, consider going to the FLC or TechLink. Those resources can provide you with facilities, equipment, expertise to enhance maybe your SBIR, STTR effort. So CRADAs can be used before, during, after award. You have to comply, agencies, I should say, have to comply with SBIR policy. And in a nutshell, basically that says the agency cannot require a small business concern to enter into a CRADA as a condition for award. The small business concern has to meet the minimum performance requirements. The CRADA can't violate any SBIR STTR requirements. And then there's another thing about funding in there. The agency and the federal lab can't require the awardee to pay in advance a payment greater than what's needed for 30 days of work. But we have a SBIR funded CRADA template for use when we do have a small business concern funding us to do some portion of the SBIR work. So next slide, please. These are just a couple examples of CRADAs where we've had that have been connected to SBIR and STTR efforts. One group, one small business was developing a UUV health management system. And we had a lot of UUV platforms that they wanted to integrate this into and test. So we worked with them to do that. We used our expertise integrating that and operating these UUV platforms at sea in order for them to get some good data on their health management system. And then the other one was an antenna system. A partner was developing an antenna system, and they've leveraged an antenna array to integrate into their antenna system as a component to the device they were building for the SBIR award. Okay, next slide. This is just an example to show how complex things can get and how crazy things can get. This is a real life example of a company that was developing a technology called Feature Analyst. I won't go into the details about what that technology was, but this is just to give you an idea of like all the agreements and things that they used. I don't know how much of a plan they had, but you can see here, CRADA's in use with BAAs, in use with STTR and SBIR awards through all stages of development. So I would encourage you as a small business to think about how you can use some of these mechanisms, tech transfer mechanisms, alongside SBIR, STTR, BAAs, and how they fit into the puzzle for your technology development. Next slide. Last thing I want to talk about is those license agreements. Similar to the previous slide about CRADA's, just think about ways that federal inventions could help you in your SBIR and STTR efforts. Again, TechLink has a list of all the DoD patents. And I think in some topics I've seen, SBIR, STTR topics, they actually list patents, government, federally owned patents at the end of those topics. You could definitely reach out to the POC on those topics to see if those patents are available for licensing, if they're part of, if you would consider those part of your work. But it also might be interesting to reach out to TechLink to see, especially if you're in the DoD realm, to see if there's any inventions that the government has or any work that the government already did that's related to your area that you could leverage. Okay, next slide, please. And that covers it. So I guess, Gretel, back to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I love that slide of how complicated the whole process can be. Something that slide that you didn't touch on was how different the agencies were. So if you got to see that slide, and we will share those slides, there was like the NSF, there was the Army, and I think that's something that sometimes gets overlooked. It's just because you're working with one agency doesn't mean that you can collaborate with other agencies. And it's the same for SBIRs. I can ask Shadi a couple questions on that and he can answer, but if you have an SBIR with one agency, there is a potential for you or for another agency to pick it up. There is certain rules with it. As you mentioned, there's a lot of policies that go with everything. So just making sure that you're abiding by those. All right, so I think I'm gonna ask some questions now. So if everyone wants to come on video again and show your faces, I'll do that. I'll start with the first one. AFCEA West is coming up. And I was just wondering if a small business wants to talk pizza and beer with Paul and Steven, will you guys be there?
I'm not going to be there. One of our counterparts, Jennifer Stewart, so she's an order like I am. They're going to have a booth for NIWC. So there will be tech transfer representation there, and she's just as open as we are. Her knowledge of beer might be a little bit lower, though.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I would say I won't be there either. But if you want to connect with us, shoot us an email and tell us where you're going to be, and we could definitely connect and talk about stuff for sure.
Thank you. And we'll make sure we share the slides and also the emails that you've provided. Thank you for providing them too. if you find those emails too long, you can always email me and I'll forward them to Paul and Stephen. Shadi, will you be at AFCIA West?
Yeah, I think we have a table that's shared with the Office of Small Business Programs. So we are working details on that, but I should be there.
Great, thank you. All right, first question, and this will be for the T2 ORDA team. So if someone has worked in the past with what used to be called SBIR, which is now NAVWAR, and they want to kind of resurrect that project, what would be their first steps?
I guess the good part is you said SBIR and not like NOSC. Our command has been under a witness protection plan for about 20 years. We've had 5 names in 20 years, so we're very hard to track. I guess part of it's going to depend. If you go far enough back, there's a lot of work we don't do anymore. We used to do torpedo work here. We don't do that anymore. Another lab would do it. Sometimes the work comes and goes with our researchers themselves. So you can reach in. I'll volunteer Gretel. You can always ask her. She can connect us. If you have a name or you have a project name, you can shoot it to us and we can try to pull the string. You start getting back, I'll say maybe like 5 years or more, it really starts to get murky whether we're going to be able to, connect to the right person with that. Does that kind of answer the question? I'm not.
Yeah, so I think to summarize, email us and we'll do our best to help.
Yeah. The one thing we will say, there's only 2 of us, and NIWC right now, Naval Information Warfare Center, we have 600 to 800 projects going at one time. So we'll do our best to interface. There's hundreds of companies, hundreds of projects, and there's 2 of us kind of in between that. But we tend to be pretty responsive. Again, we've been chartered to try to help make things work better, so we see it as our job. Stephen, anything?
I just say you might get lucky going to AFCIA or NDIA, connecting with some people. Sometimes program offices, typically they like to talk about a lot of stuff, but it may not be connected to the work you used to have. So that's part of the drawback there, right?
What about the same question for Shadi? If there was a previous SBIR effort that the small business feels can be resurrected, what does that look like for the SBIR office?
So we can always, there's no temporal requirement for us to kind of put additional SBIR funds to continue the work. But we do have to limit to 2 phase 2s if phase 2 is the phase for which they're going to get the funding for. So it's a yes and no, and it depends as the answer that everyone loves to hear.
The most common answer. So just for clarity, if they had received a phase 2 award in the past and they wanted to resurrect it, they really only have one more phase 2 chance to go through the SBIR.
Correct. And there's no limit to how far we can go back. But we can also create a phase 2 off of a prior phase 1 as long as the phase 2 doesn't exist either.
Great. And does that also go back to that question of crossing agencies? Does that apply the same?
Yeah. So if suppose a Department of Homeland Security has a phase 2, that's their one phase 2 award that's counted against the quota, which the 2 phase 2 limit still applies across agencies.
Thank you. We have another question. So it says, what is the appropriate pipeline for a small business to offer technology-based production services through SBIR or others? I'm assuming this could be like manufacturing, 3D printing, that sort of technology-based production.
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yes. What's the appropriate pipeline for a small business to offer these resources?
If they want to do production?
Right.
Okay, if I understood the question correctly, I would say, so SBIR is your research and development program. Like the start of an SBIR is like an idea that's in someone's head. And then at the end of the SBIR program is almost like a prototype. Between a prototype and like a production-based sort of state, I'd say that would be the follow-on to the program, which is the phase 3 opportunity. So if you were to understand the life cycle of it, and if they were going to start with the SBIR, it would go from a topic to a phase 1 to a phase 2 to a phase 3, which in of itself is a production-based contract, or could be a production-based contract in of itself. I don't know if I answered that question correctly, but I think I'm there.
So tech transfer is definitely not, we're not really a path for that. But for small companies that have services, for our lab, for an example, right, we have $3.7 billion come through the lab. On an order of about $1 billion of that goes out through contract, and out of that, 40% or so of that goes to like small business. So the best way to get your services is, one, pay attention to what the government's asking for and respond to those. Make sure you know all the websites where we do our announcements. And then stealing Stephen's answer from before, is when you go to AFCEA and all these loose conferences, when you start telling people what you do and people are walking around, it puts the idea in people's heads. So when they go back and they start to understand what's out there, it may lead to a future, EAA, RFP, whatever with contracts. So I think it's getting out there and being known and paying attention to what's going on, which is actually pretty hard.
Right. And it's also not just getting known by the government or the agencies, it's also getting known by other companies, because if someone becomes a prime on a contract, they can utilize you as a sub-awardee, right? So that's something also that you want to make sure that your connections, you're not just going after whoever has a government email. You're also going to connect with people that are working with the government. All right, another question. I think this is something that we get all the time. It's super general, so open to anyone. But how do we know if our technology is relevant for the Navy, specifically today, NAVWAR, NIWC, PAC? So are there any resources that are offered? Do you guys get out on conferences often to kind of showcase what is needed, what we're looking for, or is it just RFPs?
We used to have a public resource called The List that is no longer with us because of the distribution. But so like, I mean, from the SBIR world, I know you can glean a little bit of what NAVWAR is looking for through our topics and how the topics are written and phrased, or what the capability gap expressed in those topics are. The public-facing webpage for NAVWAR is also a decent resource. It's very broad and general, but kind of hits the mark in terms of like what we do as a command. And then I'd say the last thing that could be a resource, which is always, is just hit us up. So if you send us an email, we're usually the first pass, at least in the SBIR office, to gauge whether or not a particular product or technology fits what NAVWAR does.
And I think that goes for every syscom. So if you just send a little brief one-pager or a quad chart, they're usually direct you if it's not a fit for NAVWAR, but it might be a fit for another command. Shadi's actually pretty good at letting you know who he thinks might be a better fit in terms of SBIR, which is an interesting point, because SBIRs for the Navy at least have always been very strict as to what the topics are related to. So you can really only apply if there's a topic out there for you. I guess with the open topics, we might see a little bit more flexibility on that. But that's another question that has come through. Is every agency's open topic going to look the same, or does each agency have its own kind of way of utilizing that new policy?
Yeah, I guess kind of like Shadi said, right? We used to have the list due to world events and things. We've been a little bit more closed than we did. We were on this great path of being more and more open and more teaming. And then certain things have happened where we kind of started closing and we're a little more, I guess, discreet in what we talk about. But I will say attending different events and running into people, like when Steve and I are out, we kind of know basically what our lab does. And so if people start talking to us, we might be able to think of a name and we can take it back. If everybody just starts sending us one-pagers, I don't know how effective that'll be, because usually what I do if somebody, a contact cold calls me, or emails, I'll pass it off to our business portfolio managers. And then they'll try to review it. And it'll take you a few months to go that way. But our office right now, the way we're set up, we don't go seeking work. Really, the way you get into creatives and work with us is you run into one of our science and engineers at Pete's Coffee, right? Or, some technical IEEE conference, you start to talk. We've worked with people with the University of Scotland. I mean, how did that happen? They ran into each other in a conference. Next thing you know, you have two scientists talking like, we want to work together. So they come to our office and then we set it up. But as far as what we call matchmaking, it would be great, but and some labs do it, but Steve and I aren't resourced to do a real good job there, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. I think for SBIR, it's a little bit easier because there is more specific areas of responsibility that each command does. So we can definitely direct people a little bit better. But yes, please don't send a bunch of white papers to their office. Maybe just an introductory email first, and then you can move on to that. But
can I add something else, Gretel?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I would say to keep in mind too that with NIWC Pacific, we're not purchasing a lot of things. We typically, if we're going to purchase something, it's for a sponsor that we're working for. So that's going to be that. But a lot of our credas, if you're coming through the T2 office, are in a research development area. We're not to the point yet where we're going to buy a bunch of stuff. However, if we are in a creda with a company and we're developing something new, or maybe kicking the tires on a non-federal technology, industry's technology, or trying to develop something together, maybe a couple of years down the road, that could be something that a program office would be interested in, right? Just like you saw in that crazy chart of where everything fit together. So we often see, credas as a way to inform acquisition, as a way to work alongside acquisition, to where those services or products eventually could go to the people with the money, who have the money to get those things. So through a creda, you could meet people, become connected with sponsors, become connected with people who have interest in that kind of stuff. So just throwing another little flavor, another little angle to it, I guess.
Thank you. I think that also brings another point, just based on what you just said and what Paul said, which is a barrier to entry. And I think this has been something that's been a part of the government world for a very long time, is just getting in. And so has there been any changes or new programs to help assist with that you guys are aware of? I'll pitch in for SBIR. I think SBIR, the open topic, is definitely one of those, to try and open it up to more technology that the Navy might not have seen. But are there any other resources that you guys are aware of?
I don't, in the tech transfer world, I don't know if I'd say there's anything new as far as authorities go. I will say different pockets in the DoD are definitely trying to reach out. You'll see things like, DIU, Defense Innovation Unit. And then you get the whole Defense Works, which is a whole series of PIAs that are linked together. And so that's why we say tech scan. So sometimes the Program Executive Office, PEO, and that was an acronym I used before that I didn't say, but now I get that, take that one back. They'll put out a tech scan and ask a PIA to find out what's out there. And so there is more money going towards that effort. So there is, the authorities aren't different. I think there's more incentive for the different PEOs to try to reach out and accelerate their programs by finding out what's out there, what the small businesses are doing. They call it vendor lock with the big companies. There's good and bad with every way you go. So as far as new, I don't know, but maybe new ways of looking at things. Is that, like accelerators, sometimes the government's starting to do accelerators. That's not something that the government's really done that much before. And the authority's been there, but now people are actually trying it out. As you say, kicking the wheels, trying to see if it will actually work. And there's a Q&A question from Kumar. I think I pronounced it right.
Yes.
And it's
live.
What?
We can answer it live if you want to just read the question out and answer it.
Oh, I can read it. Let me pop
I'll
back
read
up.
it for you. So it says our idea or project is at an early stage that investors are asking us to pursue. It is a fundamental research idea first. Are there any opportunities for applying for fundamental research through the programs mentioned here? Kumar did mention that he didn't join on time, so I'll make sure that I send the slides so you can see some of the slides, but I think the answer would be yes.
The answer would be
depends.
Oh, so yeah, always depends. If anybody tells you otherwise, then they're only giving you half the story. With tech transfer, we really don't tend to be a money sending out. That's not one of our functions. Those are more contracts and SBIR. So there's opportunity to work fundamental research side by side via the CRADAs. You can further your fundamental research potentially by licensing something we may have already done that fills in a IP gap for your company. And I do know that different labs, PEOs, SBIR, they do put out calls for some fundamental research, but our office does not have funding to put out there for that.
Yeah, and depending on what area your technology is in, some of these other organizations like ONR, I think they do grants sometimes in a specific area. Well, it's maybe a broad area and they just call for white papers for you to submit to. And again, the place to look for those are some resources online, like I think it's sam.gov now, used to be called FedBizOps, but sam.gov, get hooked up in that. Yeah.
And then also just the different agencies. I think depending, once again, once your technology or research area is, you have to find the agency that is most interested in that. And I think every agency offers different programs too. So that's something else that it's important to be aware of. Just this is what you're working on, who is the best fit for you, right? Where can your technology actually live?
There's also a website, I think it's in our backup, for the Federal Laboratory Consortium. Stephen mentioned earlier, it's 400 labs. They have a business side of that. It's a place to look. You can go in, type in, keywords. You can find a lab that's working in your area. You might be able to find a point of contact. It's not super robust, but it is a place to start out and try to find some matches. And Gretel, I'll try to send you you have a draft list of some of these funding programs in an Excel spreadsheet. I'll send that to you, see if that's of any value.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone's interested, just feel free to email me, gvonson@connect.org or SBIR@connect.org, and I'll share any resources that we have. I think just one last point, and anyone can comment on that, but when we were talking about barrier to entry and maybe there's not that many new programs coming up, I do think that industry is changing a lot too. So when it comes to VCs, a lot more are coming in interested in dual use technology that does serve the defense. So although there might not be that many new programs within the government, there's a lot more resources outside of the government that are really investing in those technologies. So it might be good for you. I mean, Paul mentioned the IU, so it might be good to start looking at some of those resources as well that can help you kind of start out so you can develop something that can hopefully later become something useful to the government. We're a little early, so I think if there's no other questions and if there's no other updates, I'm just going to give people time back. We will make sure that we send a thank you email with a link to the recording as well as the slides. I did not add, our chat was off, so I did not add any of the links that I mentioned I would. So we'll make sure that we add those on the email as well as any of the email addresses that the speakers have shared. So I want to just take this time to say thank you so much. It's such a nice way to start the year, at least for me, because I'm a big fan of everyone on this screen. And we have a lot more workshops coming up. We mentioned the different commands. We're hoping to do a couple of highlights on the different Navy commands, so not just NAV4. So stay tuned and we'll make sure that we share those. So thank you all.
Thank you.